We need to be prepared to fight that man every single day until the end of the war, because he will fight us every single day. We need to be able to dig in and make him come at us, because he's going to come at us. And Grant does, right? So Longstreet has important insights into Grant. And when Longstreet's wounded, taken off the chessboard at the opening of this campaign, the one guy who can give Lee any insight into his opponent is off the board. We don't know if Lee and Wilcox spoke about that at all. We just don't have any record of, like Lee hanging out with his division commanders. We don't know if he taps into Wilcox for any sort of insight. But one other person who can help give Lee some insight is his chief engineer, Martin Luther Smith. Smith had commanded the division at Vicksburg. He'd been in charge of helping to construct the Vicksburg defenses and the New Orleans defenses. He ends up spending 7 months in a federal prison camp following the fall of Vicksburg. He's been recently paroled and brought to this army. He doesn't have a close relationship with Lee yet. He will develop one over the course of this campaign. So that's why Longstreet's loss is so important, because he's going to provide, or would be able to provide insight into Lee's opponent. And we're going to see over the course of today, Lee will misjudge Grant over and over and over.
Land that is part of the national park. So we're going to think about these far off sites outside of the boundary here that are still compelling and still have a story to tell. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to get us started over to my colleague Stuart, who's going to pick up the story from there.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm here to talk about the role of the USCTs, and I'm going to start with at the beginning of the Civil War. Black men weren't even allowed to join the army. They could be laborers, like stewards, scouts, teamsters, but they could not be soldiers. But by the end of the war, from 180,000 to 200,000 black men served in the U.S. military.
That the Civil War and American history is remembered. But sometimes we got to ask ourselves, is that maybe a little skewed? Right. If we don't look at it in a way that we're acknowledging what really happened, we need to make sure that we are remembering it in a way that does it justice. Okay? One historian, Megan Kate Nelson, in her book Ruined Nation, proposes something which I think is kind of interesting. She says, acts of sanitation and abstraction are about remembering only a sense of the event, experiencing what some people call the period rush. You ever get people like an Ed Barr's tour was classic? I can see it, I can envision it. That's why Ed would close his eyes when he told the story, right? In his head, it was all playing out, right? But, and I'm not criticizing Ed Barr by any means, I'm not going to go down that road. I'm just saying, it's interesting to think about this. Megan Kate Nelson says, rather than directly confronting the complicated nature of history, this phenomenon is perhaps more insidious than merely just forgetting.
Yeah.
Bend down for me. What is it?
Angle in the salient. It's not. That's the east angle. That's the bloody angle. It's that very slight turn in the salient. But what else is it? It's a rise. What's important about what becomes known as the bloody angle isn't the turn in the bloody angle, it's the rise, it's the elevation. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. We're just talking about the English language, how it's funny, anything can be a verb. Well, the other thing that's funny about the English language is it has a lot of loan words in it. Salient is one of them. It's French. It's a fancy word for a bulge or something that's prominent. And we're standing in front of the Muleshoe Salient. What is a salient in the military sense? It is a forward bulge in a battle line. Why does that even matter? Well, it matters because salients are weak spots. You can kind of think of a salient like a peninsula. When you have a big forward bulge from a battle line, it allows an attacking army to surround that bulge in the same way water surrounds a peninsula. So if water can surround a peninsula, if an attacking army can surround a salient, it can be attacked from all sides. It becomes a weak spot in the enemy's battle line. Lee decides that trying to hold the salient is better than abandoning the salient. So he packs it full of infantry and he packs it full of artillery, and he just hopes he can hold it. Now, for the first couple days of the battle, that ends up being mostly fine. Not so much on May 12th. See, on May 10th, the U.S. Army makes an attempt to breach the salient with an attack that gets known as Upton's attack. The attack is only partially successful, but it proves to the Army of the Potomac's commanders, General Grant and General Meade, that it's possible. So they start redeploying the U.S. Second Corps from way out on the U.S. right to come around to send the entire 20,000 plus men of the U.S. Second Corps against the salient. Lee mistakes that redeployment for the Army of the Potomac leaving. So he orders the artillery in the salient to pack up and leave, to be packed up, taken out of battery, and be ready to get on the road so that they can chase the Army of the Potomac to whatever the next vital intersection is. It's not until late on May 11th that Allegheny Johnston, commanding the division here in the salient, realizes that no, the Second Corps isn't leaving, the Second Corps is here. Then he begins screaming for the artillery to return. The orders go out for the artillery to come back, but it's going to be too late. The orders for the attack to go out come. Now, the attack was supposed to start at 5 a.m., but heavy fog delays the assault. And so U.S. troopers are stuck out there in the wood line, waiting as heavy rain begins to fall on their heads. Everything out here turns to mud. The historian of the 20th Massachusetts described the situation like this. Most men stood up in the ranks, swaying restlessly backward and forward, pulling their feet out of the mud and putting them back in again, fretful, complaining, and ill at ease.
Compton in 1818 to 1819. We know that from tax information as well as deeds. There are a lot of dates that are bandied about. That's when the core of the structure was built. And we still have that core present in the current building. And that model that you have on the page I kind of circulated around, that's what the first structure, the Barkers, built during that time period. About 18 feet by 35 feet, so it was relatively small. And only had a few rooms. In fact, there's a description in the Virginia Herald in 1820 that notes, talking about the property here, the lot contains 10 acres of highly improved land, well enclosed. The situation is healthy and beautiful. The distance from town is about 3/4 of a mile. The dwelling is a brick containing 4 rooms, big departure from what we have today, and a kitchen. That kitchen would have been on the west elevation. So again, that model, you can see that shed addition, that's the kitchen. Cool thing, if you climb down the basement, go in some crawl spaces. They actually elevated the floor. The remnants of the kitchen are still there. You can actually read that with the fireplace, as well as chicken bones. So kind of interesting there.
But it's also a place where war came and changed things dramatically, not only for the people that lived here, but for the people who came here. And in 1864, 160 years ago this week, there were dramatic battles fought in the wilderness and at Spotsylvania Courthouse, and the losses were extravagant. On May 8th, 1864, Major General George Gordon Meade designated Fredericksburg to be the official hospital for the Army of the Potomac. There were about 26,000 wounded soldiers that were processed through Fredericksburg and its environs. They used a lot of the public buildings, they used a lot of the churches, they used a lot of private residence. They used Brompton. Brompton served as the hospital for the 2nd Division of the Union 9th Corps. And it gained a little bit of notoriety because on May 19th and May 20th of 1864, photographers came to Fredericksburg and started taking a number of pictures of the buildings and of the wounded, and they paid particularly close attention to this spot. No less than 3 different photographers came up here in those 2 days. So we had representatives from Matthew Brady and Company that showed up here to take photos. We had one of his former proteges, now a rival, in Alexander Gardner, coming up here to take shots. And we also had a military photographer, a captain named Russell, who came up here to take photos of this spot.
Thank you for watching our video. Please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, please leave those in the comment section. We'll work on getting them out to you as soon as possible.